unfortunately, our recurring WebEx link expired. So we have a new WebEx link tonight, which the meeting number is 2334-319-9539. And the password is as it is in the agenda. All right, so we're back online here. Do we have any public here to participate? Doesn't look like it. Okay. Then we'll move on to the FY25 budget guidelines. Mr. Venizio, do you have something for us?
Share the slides with you.
I just saw that came. Let me get that. Actually, I'm going to.
Between 20 and 30 emails you got from me.
I've been bugging you with quite a few. I appreciate your patience.
So I had to send it to you a couple times.
Okay, Doug, I'm going to forward this to you. If you could put it up, that would be great.
Got enough?
All right.
Okay.
I'll forward it to the whole thing in a moment. But
Have we here?
why don't you put that up?
Oh, look at that.
And I will forward the slides to everyone so that they have a copy, if that's okay with you, John?
Yep.
Okay. So let me do that right now. All right, you should all have a copy of the slides in your email now if you want to refer to those or in the future.
Can you adjust the screen?
We're going to get the slides up in a moment here. We have our team of WebEx experts on the case here.
We're going to grab a couple of hard copies for people that don't have a copy.
Oh, yeah.
How many we need?
Raise your hand if you need a paper copy.
Oh, I forgot.
Looks like just 3 or so.
It's easier than seeing it.
You're cooperating there.
Yeah, I honestly have to figure out how to make it share to the whole.
So, is value added earnings plus what we?
All right, while we're getting that together, I'll just skip ahead and mention that we have the Burlington Civic Expo coming up next Wednesday, which is why we're meeting today instead of next Wednesday. So Ways and Means has it.
Here. The expo is here?
No, the expo is at the
COA.
Murray Kelly wing, right? So Ways and Means has a table there, so it'll be a particularly exciting expo. So in the back of your mind, think about great ideas of things we could do there. We'll come around to this again at the end of the meeting.
So what's the expo? I'm not familiar with
So the idea of the expo is all the town departments and various elected officials and committees have a table there, and the public can come in and see, ask any questions they want, see what various groups do, find out who's on Ways and Means, whatever. So it's a great way to get your entire town government all in one place. I hope we have a designated survivor on this. So, excuse me?
Did you volunteer for that?
So Doug and I will be at the table there.
We nominated him and elected him 2 years ago.
All right. All right. Are we up there, Doug? Really close? I've stalled as much as I can.
You should just start anyway. They'll catch up.
Okay. John, why don't you go ahead and Doug will get it up on the screen any moment now and catch up to
Okay,
you.
thank you. So we're just going to run through some slides quickly. Everybody in this room, I believe, has seen these slides a few different times. So this is this year's version. We had our annual budget summit, which used to be called the guideline setting meeting. We had it earlier this month, where we had representatives from Ways and Means, from the Select Board, and from the school committee, with the town's finance team and administrator, and we just kind of reviewed what the recommendations and estimates were for this year. So for those that have the slides, we'll just go through the first slide is where we usually start off, is just say what the impact of last year was. So this is sort of the end result of what we started this time last year and went through and approved in May and rolled forward to when we set the tax rate in November is the final step, and these are kind of the final numbers of where we landed after all of that. As you can see, the tax rates are there, what the single-family average tax bill is and what the average increase is. And one thing of note is that the single-family home value rose again by another 10%. For multiple years, we continue to have extraordinary residential value growth. We do have commercial growth, just not at the same level. So that's a disturbing trend that while it's great that our homes are more valuable, it hurts us a little when the commercial values outpace the residential. Anyway, that's just a snapshot of where we ended up. It's sort of the, closes the book on that stuff for FY24. The next slide is sort of a financial indicator. Starting 24, where were we? What did we have for totals? This is kind of our cash reserves or any additional. So you can see what our free cash number was certified at, over $32 million, right in the ballpark of what we expected. We carried over or had unused a significant portion of our free cash from 23 into 24. You can see the number of what we're going to use, what is proposed for the January. For those that have printed slides, there's an updated number, that's 1.7 million, because one of the warrant articles changed by a little bit. So you can see what our stabilization value is and what we have for excess capacity. I know that everybody in this room knows already, but for those hundreds watching at home, excess capacity is the difference between what the maximum tax levy, the amount we could tax was, and what we actually taxed on the bills.
Hey, John, can you pull that mic a little closer to you?
Sure. So our budget goals remain the same. Administration, the finance team, the boards, we want to try to maintain the level of services that the residents expect, desire. We want to prioritize investment. We want to prioritize investment in infrastructure and not relive the sins of the past and forget about our important infrastructure throughout the town. We always want to try to minimize fees. We're lucky here in Burlington to have very few fees. So we keep that in mind. It's always one of our budget goals. And we want to be able to adjust and adapt to any long-term liabilities like OPEB, pension, things like that. Next slide. So what assumptions and the effects? So going into 25 with those budget goals in mind, the assumptions we use each year is we want to project an increase to local aid and local receipts and state aid. This year, coming up, 25, will be our first year after using ARPA money as revenue replacements for the past 3 years. We had a 3-year plan to use $1.5 million worth of ARPA money to help mitigate the losses from our local receipts due to COVID. 24 is our last year, so next year is our first year without that. So we want to plan for that. And we want to plan to add back revenue as this recovery has continued. We'll talk about some more good news in local receipts when we get to the next one. We want to project realistic numbers for our accommodated accounts. Those, as everybody knows, those are pretty volatile. Some of them can go up double digits for a few years in a row. Last year, we came here at this meeting and we're talking about in the 9s potentially for our accommodated accounts. It wound up being closer to 8, which is good. That typically happens. We come, because Paul's a former accountant, so the sky is falling every day. We come here, we talk about what could be, and then we hope for better. For For '25, we're projecting around 7, hoping to come in under 7, and that's more typical. You'll see in a slide what the 5-year average has been. And we want to set minimal operating budget increases while keeping our budget goals in mind. It's about maintaining services where we can, not having to add fees for things, and investing in our infrastructure. And as always, our range for the tax levy increase, we have a target range to try to land somewhere between 4.5 and 5.5 year over year. That's our assumptions we start with. The next slide is just operating budget. You know, the drivers are the same as we've sat here the last few years and told you. You know, our supplies and materials throughout the town, we haven't increased those accounts nearly enough as inflation has happened. We have increases in utilities and fuels, just like everybody here feels in their pocketbook at home. We have the same, we're not immune to it here in the town. And we have current labor contracts and potential labor contracts to think about. If anybody's been watching what the union contracts around us have been settling for, it's higher than what we're used to. So our level service budget for this year is well over 4.5%. It's higher than it's been in quite some time. You can see there that the 5-year average for our operating budget increases is 3.8%. Accommodated accounts, we talked a little bit about how to try to be cautious as we can here. The normal drivers you hear us talk every year: health insurance, debt service, retirement, OPEB. Those, OPEB's on a plan where we increase it by 9.3%. That's a big ticket item. Our health insurance, through great work by the committee, that includes both the union and the town, works very hard to keep that number nice and low. We've had great luck for a long time here, projecting to have around a 5% increase there, hopefully less than that, and that's great. That's been what our trend has been. That could easily be 3 times that, and is in lots of other places. So that's a big driver for us. Middlesex retirement system has a funding schedule. It increases by 6 or 7% annually. It's a $14 million number, so 6.7% of that's quite a bit of money. In our debt service, as we know, we always try to smooth out the increases in our debt service, and has worked for a long time. We're coming up against a time here where that might not work, but we're planning for that, and we'll be talking more about that as we get closer to May. And big things, the trash contract that last year was 15% increase because it was a renewal of a long-term contract that was very favorable to us. It's a big ticket item. This year's increase is about 4.6%, so much better news there. But again, it's a lot of money, so any percent over 4 or 5% eats into it. And then special ed accommodated is it's very volatile, and we won't have that number for a few more months while they work that out over at the school department. But with all that doom and gloom, we're still projecting to be around 7%, hoping to come in lower than that. It's very early for accommodated accounts. We're talking about stuff, the end of this budget cycle we're talking about is for 18 months from now. So we'll continue to refine it, and we'll nail that down and hopefully come in less. You can see the 5-year average is about 5.5. That varies from a high of 8-something to a low of 3-something. So next slide, we get into the revenue side of things. So local receipts, you can see we talked a little bit about local receipts at the beginning, and for FY25 you can see there the 5-year average is basically 0. That's after taking a $2 million hit when COVID started, so that was a big hole to dig out of. We're finally being able to project to get back into the race here in 25, about a 10% increase in this category, which is great. And that includes losing the $500,000 of ARPA money. So the data is trending in the right direction. We're losing that ARPA money, but the rooms tax has recovered much faster than we thought. It's not to the levels it was, and not sure if it ever will get to that level, but it's much better than what it had been the last couple of years. Meals tax and the permits have been the best years we've had here. So finally, a bit of revenue, great revenue news. I don't think I've had the opportunity to give you guys great revenue news since I started here, so this is fun. The next slide is state aid. We don't spend a lot of time talking about it because it's not a ton of money to us. It's not a huge chunk of our budget, but every bit is important, and it's big enough to, if it went away, it would hurt quite a bit. So we had been stagnant in state aid, grew by a couple, 2 to 3%. If you take out the 1 year where there was a formula change, which was great, it was FY23, we had a formula change, we got an additional $1 million. So our 5-year average is more like 6%, but if you take out that high number, it's more like 3. So that's about what we're estimating this year, what our normal 5-year would be. One thing that the governor's budget comes out next Wednesday. Typically, it's the lowest is a minimum aid increase, which means the lowest you're going to get is X amount, whether it's $25, $50 per student increase on your total Chapter 70. That normally, I would say that you can always count on that. Given the news the last couple days about the state's revenues, who knows what's going to happen next week and then into the spring. So as I said, we're estimating 3% or 2.9%, which is our 5-year average. And then the most important thing, the tax levy. So as you can see, the increase over those years, over those 5 years is 4.8%, which is right in our target range. If you were to take out that formula change and not factor in the formula change, it'd be more like 5.1. Again, our target is to land somewhere between 4.5 and 5.5. Any of those increases in accommodated, when they're ups in the 7, 8s, 9s, that's going to drive that up. And because the last few years we haven't been able to increase the other 2 categories, local receipts or state aid, the whole burden goes on the tax levy. So in '23, we were lucky enough to have that increase in state aid, helps on the tax levy. This year, we're lucky enough to have a big increase, and be able to project a big increase in local receipts, helps on the tax levy. So we think, given all that, we'll fall right in our range. The next slide is sort of a few scenarios about what would our estimated tax levy increase be based on these scenarios. As you can see, the reason we picked these 4 is the first one is what last year's operating budget increase was. And the last one is what gets us closest to stay at level services. And on the last side, you can see that the administration recommended to the group at the budget summit that we go with the last recommendation, which is a 4.5 increase on operating, and for the school and for the town, and a 7% increase in accommodated. We think we'll come in a little bit less than accommodated, but as of right now, given those other factors and the assumption we used, we expect that the tax levy will be no higher than 5.25, which again is in our range, granted at the little bit higher end of the range, but not at the top. For a little perspective, when we were here last year, we were projecting over the top of the higher range. We were saying we could be as high as 5.7 because we weren't sure about the accommodated. As those came down, so did, and we landed somewhere in the 5.4 range on the increase in the tax levy. So I know I said a lot of words now. I'm happy to answer any questions. And Paul, I don't know if Paul has anything to add, or Gary.
Excellent words. Do we have questions or comments on this? Mike?
So on the levy increase, you kind of at the beginning, you mentioned the target range was 4.5 to 5.5%. Each year, that's the range. And this year, you're projecting a 5.25% estimate. So how does that 5.25, how does that affect people's, the residential tax bills? Is that split with commercial so that they cover a higher percent, or should people be looking at their tax bills and saying, okay, my tax bill is going to go up 5.25%?
I think that, Mike, the way it's trickled down the last couple of years with a overall tax levy increase of about 5% has resulted in approximately about $300 on the average single-family home. What was that in terms of a percent?
So last year was, the current year, I'm sorry, 24 was about 5.4% increase on the tax levy, and that was $292. So the formula has the calculation has different pieces to it, so value, it can change a little bit, but that's about what it's been.
So just to add to that, so because there's new growth also, a 5.25% levy increase doesn't translate into a 5.25% tax increase because the new growth adds to that also. So in practice, at least from what I've seen, it's maybe 0.5 to 0.75% lower. So this 5.25% increase here in the levy might translate into a current tax bill going up, 4.75%, say.
Okay, can I ask another question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think it was, also we were talking about level service, back up at the top here. This level service is around 4.5%. That's just to keep things running as they were last year in the town, right?
Yeah.
And so what goes into that 4.5%? Is it, I know you said there's increase in material costs, there's increases in heating and utilities and that type of thing?
Yep.
And then,
Yeah, so it's personnel, it's carrying forward what we're doing now, pretty much the same level of services, so the same level of resources, human resources, personnel. It's
Yeah.
carrying that forward on the contracted rate, and it's any contractual increases we have, like the trash contract, which is a 5-year contract, and we have a known number, so to speak, and then estimating something for, certainly not what the inflation numbers have been the last few years, but estimating some sort of inflationary factor for the other stuff.
okay, and that, so the 5-year average was 3.8%, so we're, what, 7%, 0.7% higher than that, the 5-year average, and that's due to the increases you just spoke about?
5-year average, on the...
Yeah, you had the 5-year average. is
Operating increase?
Operating budget, yeah, 5-year average is...
Yeah, I would say the growth, and then as our personnel burden has increased with new contracts, and certainly will continue to do so with the next group of contracts. But yeah, that's a big portion of it, and then inflation.
Okay.
We've seen that.
Thank you.
Other, Chris?
If I'm correct, last year we were running 3.5 or 3.75? 3.75, so we're running quite a bit here from last year to this year. I would say I am curious and concerned about the governor's budget cuts and how those are going to impact the aid. When Fox Hill starts to act FY '26, the tax base should expect a levy if it goes forward.
It
It will depend upon the cash flows on actually building the project. Obviously, we'll borrow money judiciously. We won't just borrow it all at once as the construction schedule is laid out. I would assume that we would start to incur some, I wouldn't say maybe the most significant cost, but we will start incurring costs up at, as we move forward into '26. But the big chunk of it, in the way that the money is financed, will probably come a little bit further down the line. Maybe 5 years from now, it'll start really loading onto the budget in terms of debt service.
Frank?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to know what labor contracts are open that will be settled for FY '25 on your side. Are there any?
all of our union contracts are settled through 25. It would be A&P since
Which
they're
is
not
every
union,
year.
It's annual.
Right, and schools is not settled, so that one's open, right?
Correct.
Correct.
And are you assuming, so you sort of know the numbers that you'll be faced with for labor on your side, the schools you are using, I guess, whatever the school department is estimating at this point? Is that built into here now?
I think, just in summary, we expect the cost of the labor contracts to increase over the next few years. That's what we're seeing out in the market in other communities.
Right, but your numbers are known, right, for police and fire and whatnot?
Yes.
Yeah,
We've already absorbed some of the increase.
Right.
Because, we're on the third year of a contract that
Right.
was higher than we're used to, but
yeah, I mean, that's partly why the operating budget is higher to the rate that it is labor, but at least on your side, there's settled contracts, so you know what you're looking at there. The fuel contract, is there a new one that's going to go out? We sort of bulk purchase and contract for diesel and gasoline for all of our vehicles, is that true?
yes, we do.
And is that an open, is that to be renegotiated? We had a pretty favorable number for it the past several years.
We pay a pretty decent cost on gasoline and diesel. I think it's off the state contract, so we're basically paying a penny or two more than, what the fuel gets delivered in Boston Harbor at, obviously without the taxes that, a typical resident may have to pay for gas. So we get a pretty good cost on that. On the utility cost, we do have contracts for electricity
Oh, I might have been confusing.
and
things.
natural gas that go out to bid, and we could check the status on those, but those are expected to go up as well.
When you settle one of those bids, is it a one-year deal or is it a multi-year deal?
I think we have an option, but I think what we've seen, the past several have been about 5-year deals once they're locked in.
And are we in the midst of that, or are we going to have to
Well,
renew?
we'll check that with Public Works.
Yeah, we use a consultant that tells us when the market's hot, if you can use those.
Yeah,
But for fuel, Frank, just to point out that we pay less than you see at the gas stations here, but when that goes up, so does ours.
Yeah.
It doesn't get to that number, but the increase is the same.
and the natural gas is probably a big factor, right? Because that's the heat for all of our buildings, right?
Yes.
Okay, but you don't see a problem there? You think that you're ballparking whatever increases there pretty well? All right, because that's usually been favorable for us. Our occupancy numbers have never really skyrocketed. I wanted to know another thing. On local receipts, you're projecting for this coming fiscal year, FY25, an increase of 10%. Is that 10% year over year? Yeah.
From 24.
4, yeah,
So if you were to compare it to pre-COVID,
yeah,
it's much less.
yeah, okay.
It's still...
It's still good,
Yeah, it's still very good. It's $1 million more.
Right.
So it's still the highest local receipts number we've ever had. But it took us a while to get back to that.
Okay. And those reflect hotel, meals, what else is in that?
Permits,
Motor vehicle excise.
Yeah, the excise.
and income.
So the permitting that you collect through the building department's reflected in that? Okay, so those are all pretty strong. All right. That all sounds good. And I just wanted to recap a little bit. So to Mike's question about the increase for the average taxpayer, I think what you really got to look at is the dollars. The percentages get kind of wonky. So what we're saying is that the average single-family bill is going to go up, say, $300. The average, and the full tax bill was $6,500. So that ratio is kind of, where what the change is going to be. It's $300 out of, $6,200. I think that's really the way. Everybody looks at percentages on this stuff, but the problem is it gets pretty confusing because of the basis changing, as John was pointing out. But in terms of the real dollars out of people's pockets, what we're saying is this reflects about a $300 over the year for the average person. pretty big range in the average, though. I imagine from low to high, it's probably pretty huge, right?
Can be.
Right. Okay, that's great, thank you.
Steve?
In the past couple of years, we've had the split, like, for schools in town. Are we saying that this year is going to be exactly 4.5% for both, or do you anticipate another split?
Yes.
You do?
This current year was not split either, FY '24.
Oh, you're not splitting it? Correct. Okay, thanks.
To follow up on that, Mr. Chairman, so to whatever extent schools comes in higher or lower than 4 or 5, that's really going to be more money or less money. You're looking at 4 or 5 on the municipal side.
Yes.
To meet your budgets.
That's what we're going to try to get down to.
Yeah, okay. All right, so that's, this notion of the blend will leave the whole number alone kind of goes away. Either everyone hits it or they don't.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to point out that John and I had met with school, Eric and Nicole a couple times, and just so that the subcommittee is aware, a couple pressures that they're dealing with will be the bus contract unsettled, the teacher's contract unsettled, and on the town side, we're dealing with a real pressure in the Public Works budget for the Public Works Subcommittee, because since the PFAS issue came along, we've been required to utilize a lot more MWRA water much sooner in the process than we had anticipated, so that's causing a little bit of pressure on the Public Works budget. So just a couple of areas to bring to your attention that will come into discussion as we move along in the process.
Can't shut off the water. Well, you can, but it's not nice.
No one suggested that approach yet.
Yeah.
Anything else? Okay, so John is getting the budget calendar together, expects to finalize it this week, I think. So as soon as that's squared away, I'll forward that out to everyone, and then the subcommittee chairs can start setting up their meetings with their respective departments so that they can come with recommendations for the presentation to the full committee. So that's coming up shortly.
So you can share that last one I sent, that's finalized on our end.
Oh, that's actually good now.
I
Okay.
ended up touching base with Nicole, so I changed it
Oh, okay, great.
to
All right.
reflect what you had shared with me.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'll send that out shortly then. And then, as I say, subcommittee chairs should start setting up their meetings. The sub...
John, let me just point out one thing. When you look at the calendar, you'll see the timing of when you can expect to get the 24 information. We just got the drafts from our departments, so it's too early to call them to set up a meeting now. But you'll notice on the calendar when you can
Give them a little
get more
time.
information.
All right, and one thing you'll note from the calendar is that things are happening a little earlier than they have in the past, so we won't be having our final Ways and Means meeting on the school budget one day before, town meeting. So there will be plenty of time to discuss things, and hopefully all the numbers then in the budget book going town meeting will actually be things that have been finalized as opposed to notional things that we hope will be true. So that'll be a nice change that we won't be waiting to the last minute this year. Yeah, Steve?
Just one point to that, too, is that they're going to start with capital warrant articles first rather than later, so those will come early in the process.
Why, no, I know the capital warrant articles will be with the school budget at the same time as the current plan.
Right, but the school committee will be reviewing them in opposite order. They'll start internally reviewing them and voting on them early in the process. We'll all vote with them at one night, of course, but that we'll be seeing them at subcommittee meetings earlier.
Excellent, okay, so they're happening ahead of time also, which is great. Okay. Roger?
That raises the question, what's the target number for capital items?
But the capital requests are due on this Friday.
Yeah, but your target number for school and town?
I think we discussed preliminary was something similar to last year, which was, I think, 5 million.
Good.
Frank?
One other thing, Mr. Chairman, I hate to bugging you. Other departments.
That's why we're here, Frank.
Yeah, I know. That are not under your control, so it'd be Board of Health, Library, Rec,
Planning,
Planning,
town clerk,
Town Clerk, yeah, okay, any more?
probably a couple.
So the question is...
It hasn't changed.
To what, I know it hasn't changed. To what extent are they aware or on board with, these targets, if at all?
I would just say in general that most of the departments work collaboratively with us to try to meet the overall town side budget goals.
So you're going to sort of make...
I wouldn't say it's 100% smooth every year, but I would say that in general, all independently elected boards and committees
Right.
work very closely with us to try to make things work.
Have you had any feedback on that at all? Do any of them feel like they're going to be, it'll be problematic, or they've got something large coming up?
I mean, it's the same story every year.
Send money?
Yes, we haven't been alerted to any extraordinary issues, aside from the typical ones we may discuss on a year-to-year basis with them.
Okay,
It's nothing out of the ordinary.
thank you. All right.
Just a random comment, I mean, this year's target number is actually higher than in some previous years, so
Yes.
maybe the needs have risen in excess of that, but
Yeah.
It will hopefully appear easier at the start, at least. Okay, anything else on that? All right, very good. Thank you very much. All right, so next on the agenda is the OPEB update. Gary? Or Frank, or David, did you have something you want to say leading into this
Well,
first?
everyone has these summary charts that
So everyone has the OPEB
is,
charts that I forwarded, I think yesterday, either yesterday or earlier today.
right, I know you just got them, and I don't expect anybody to have got their master's degree in actuarial studies overnight, but you have that, which Gary gave us, and I think the best thing to do is to have Gary just review it. We did go over this in the Town Hall 1 subcommittee. The focus is really on the most recent one, which is a year old, the end of December 2022. And we're trying to, what we're basically trying to do is, through the summary information, get a handle on how is the program performing? How are we doing with expenses? How is the trust fund growing? What's happening with the liability? What's happening with the earnings? Gary will go over all of that. I think that, at least my point of view from what we got out of this information in a discussion, but you will need time to study this. This is, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, you just listen, I think. But we've had some pretty rough years in the markets, obviously, and I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. But, the long-term goal of this program, this is really what I want to get at up front here, is because we have some new people here as well. The long-term goal of this whole program is to take what was an enormous liability of unfunded health insurance for retirees, because we never put any money in it. So up about, I don't know, how long have we been doing this? 8 years now? Pardon? It might be, I don't remember. A while. But we made up our minds that, we can't keep flying the ship this way. So we put together a program to create to take advantage of a trust fund you can legally create, and you can invest it in the open markets, and you can put money in it specifically to build up monies to offset the liability. We put that program in motion. We superfunded it for about 3 years, I think, with not only a base amount, but we put in increments of like $500,000 several times. And we have a program that says annually, if we put in 9.3% in the previous year's programmatic installment, which was like $1 million last year. I think it was $1.1 million maybe.
yes.
Yeah. So every year, we're going to increase our installment by 9.3%. And if you do that forever, it seems like forever, but it was a 30-year program. What happens is the trust fund finally gets to the point where its revenues, its earnings, start to match the drain that the retirement system needs annually. So if you can take a dividend out of your trust fund of $5 million or $8 million, and your retirees need $8 million for their share of that year's health insurance, you no longer are generating a liability or a backlog. So it takes a long time to catch up with the backlog we created. I think we started out with about a $200 million hole, if I'm not mistaken. It was pretty big. And what we see in the numbers here is that the percentage of the unfunded liability is declining. So we're gaining on the thing. And somewhere around, another 10 years, we'll be at the point where the actual unfunded number will start to shrink. Because it grows every year because the trust fund isn't big enough to really keep up. At some point, you'll get into equilibrium, and then you'll go beyond it, and you'll start to actually get the trust fund big enough that it retires the unfunded liability. At that point, then what you have to do is put in what's called the normal cost, and you'll see that in these documents. And the normal cost is what you should have been doing forever, which is the amount of money you need to put in every year to actuarially cover the cost of every employee when they retire. So if somebody's got an average of 15 years to retirement, you have to put in enough money so that when the 15 years comes due, the trust fund actually as a dividend can cover their retirement costs as a retiree. And then you don't have a liability. You have a funded liability. That's what this is all about. My take is the program is doing remarkably well considering all the ups and downs of the markets. And Gary will give us more info on this, I'm sure, and we can bring in the people. But I think David and I worked pretty hard with the administration to try to get this at least to be able to, after 30 to 40 years, the liability would be gone. And if we can get it at an equilibrium point, then we have options. Then we can say, well, if we need to put less in, we know that we're not growing the liability, we're holding it steady. If we put more in, we can shrink it faster. So we have some options there. That's my view on this and where I think we're at. And I think we're in a pretty good position despite a couple of lousy years of earnings.
So just for background, as you know, we do every 2 years, the OPEB program is reviewed with our consultants. So this is one of those every 2 years. And so we have with us our treasurer collector, Gary Giannino. If you could give us the details, please.
Thank you, John. Members of the committee, as Frank discussed somewhat the reasoning behind the OPEB funding, our money balance as of November 30th is $16.5 million. It is in the PRIT funds, the Pension Management Investment Trust, which is a state-run, oversees the program through our state treasurer. That fund has $95 billion in that fund. It's pretty diversified over some different areas, including global equity, value add, Timberland, private equity, core fixed, and real estate. As of September 30th, the one-year average rate for the PRIT funds is 9.3. The benchmark, which is a combination of Mellon Bank and some different, depending upon the different stratification of the fund, sometimes it's global markets, sometimes it's real estate, Timberland. The benchmark was 10.1, as I discussed with the subcommittee. In prior years, the PRIT fund has been probably 0.5% higher. So this is the first time I've seen it in my 3.5 years be a bit lower, be that 0.7%. The downturn in the past year was basically in real estate and in timber, which in the past have been some of the leaders. It makes sense for the real estate side, as we talk about the commercial office market, those types of things. Value add also had a down year compared to the past. The board for PRIT is made up of some pretty heavy hitters, I could say, across the different areas of expertise. I've sat in on different meetings virtually. I've not gone to any of their in-person meetings. They do come to the Middlesex County Advisory Committee. Middlesex County has their money in the PRIT fund also, so I usually get a direct overview on a quarterly basis of the PRIT funds. As Frank stated, the plan, we continue to make contributions. The next fiscal year subscribed, which will be coming, I think, later on, we'll vote on that, is $1.2 million. And that would give us approximately 16% of our funded percentage. Now, it is not a required by law to make contributions to this. It's more a prudent decision moving forward versus hindering future years. And Frank, also, we're paying for some of the sins of the past, not funding it. Now, the oversight organizations have required, and now in financial statements, you'll see it in different communities, unfunded liabilities, and it happened in the corporate world too. Unfunded liabilities became prevalent in a balance sheet and can make it look somewhat offset the quick asset ratio, which is if you have to pay your bills immediately, that wouldn't be taken, it's treated as a long-term liability. But it's, I think, and I agree, it's better to be aware of what's coming than having it hit us straight in the face somewhere down the road, 10 years down the road. Now, this plan is set to be funded as of 2047, and I think it's safe to say it's still what of a crystal ball as to what is going to happen in the next 10, 15 years. We are using a discount rate of 7%, which is predominantly the right size for using as a discount rate, and that's your expected return. Some communities use a higher rate. And 3 years ago, when we started talking about it, and Paul and John discussed that with me, we feel it's better to be prudent again and use a lower rate, be a little more conservative in what we think we're going to return. PRIT also uses a 7%. They've been, over 10 years, they've averaged about 7.8, a 5-year return, 6.8, if you look at their returns. And because of what was happening in 2022 compared to the 11 months or 9 months of '93, we've shown a 9% increase. But November was not a good month market-wise. So I think we're going to, and I see that in the monthly statement, some of the gain that we had in previous months has decreased. But in 2022, just to put in perspective, we lost value of $1.7 million in our investments. We've made $1.1 million back so far as of November. And we'll see. I do not have the December numbers. I don't usually get that until the 20th day, the next month. We as a financial management team are happy with PRIT. I think they provide us with sometimes too voluminous much information to review, but the fact that they're diversified in so many different areas is a smart thing to do and also prudent. So, I don't know if anyone has any questions through the chair.
Yeah, any OPEB? Mike?
So the PRIT fund, Gary, the benchmark you mentioned, 10.1%, that was for what period of time?
That was for the annualized returns, a one-year annualized return as of September 30th.
Okay, so yeah, so they're not saying, we think we can return 10%
No.
going on. It was just based on the kind of the market.
It was a 1 year because if you look from 92 to 92 was not a good year. So you're going to see a higher increase. In 21, we had, what, a 22% increase return. If you really want to look to the 3, the 5, the 10 year. And if I look to the 10 year, which is probably a better, we're talking about a 7.8% return.
And is the PRIT fund like mostly investing in equities, or are they investing in bonds, or what kind of?
They're more in equities. They're all over the place as far as the different areas. They're in global equity, value-added fixed income, private equity, core fixed income, and real estate. And so they're quite diversified. And each quarter, semi-annual, we get a report as what one fund is doing, one segment of their group is doing versus another, and they meet annually and change their percentages of what's invested. Let's see, I know last year they decreased, I think, the global fund by like 1%, but they right-size it, they look at it on a consistent basis, which, from my standpoint, I thought was pretty good. They increased the private equity and they decreased the global equity. Private equity, they increased by 1%, global equity, they decreased by 1%.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you.
Other comments on OPEB? Okay, thanks a lot, Gary.
You're welcome.
All right, so we'll move on to the January town meeting articles. I'll just note the index of articles I sent around earlier, the article numbers have increased by 1 since then, so try not to get confused by my original email that will have the wrong numbers on them. So the first one we'll be looking at is, and this will match what we received from the town clerk. Article 8, replenish reserve fund. Do we have a report on that?
Yep. So just, John already went over it, but just as a refresher again, free cash was certified this year at $32.5 million approximately through the proposed articles of free cash. We're estimating using about $1.7 million of that. So balance forward to the May will be about $30 million. So stabilization is about 10.7. So just wanted to give you the benchmark of where the cash position sits. Article 8 is to replenish the reserve fund. The reserve fund is basically the Ways and Means Emergency Fund. We set up on the initial budget season, we put $200,000 in there. And then once free cash is certified and in January, we augment that with an additional $100,000. To date, we have not used any funds of that 200. Again, we have the ability to approve the expenditure without having to go to town meeting, so it's a good thing to have. And if we don't use it, it goes back to free cash. Subcommittee voted 2-0 in favor.
Great, thank you. Discussion? That was quick. Second? Okay. So this is Article 8, replenish reserve fund, $100,000 from free cash. We'll do a roll call on this. Did we lose? Well, Ed was there.
He's bouncing in and out, though.
Okay, well, if we quickly vote while he's there, we can do it by hand. All right. No one else is online. Okay. Those in favor, raise your hands. And opposed? Okay, I believe that's 13-0-0.
Ask a question when you come back.
All right. Yes, 13-0-0. All right, next is Article 9, transfer free cash to water stabilization fund.
Yeah, I wanted to ask just one thing, a clarification, Mr. Chairman, on the free cash.
Yep.
So we're saying that we're expecting the balance as of May to be $30,849,000, right? But at the May town meeting, we're assuming a draw of about how much for warrant articles?
Well, last May it was around 10 million
10 mil,
for all of them.
10 million?
Usually we had things that would have normally been bonded that we decided to use free cash.
Okay, so we really haven't talked about what will go on there at all, right?
Yeah, it's too early, we don't even have the question.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood what that forward number was. Thank you.
Okay, so back to Article 9.
Article 9, transfer from free cash to the Water Stabilization Fund. This fund is set up to capture water revenue from the general fund and apply it to the costs associated with our connection to the MWRA. Again, receipts come into the general fund. Once free cash is certified, we then transfer the funds into the Water Stabilization Fund. I've been doing this since 2019. We're hoping, or the administration is hoping, that this is a step that we won't have to do continuing years, but for now, we have to vote on it. So this year, the transfer is $1,424,514 from free cash into the Water Stabilization Fund. Subcommittee voted 2-0.
Okay, discussion on this? Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in short, is this basically the amount we're paying for MWRA water? This is 1.4?
Mike, what this represents is the portion of water receipts that was related, water receipt increases when Mr. Sanchez proposed the project. I believe he promised a series of water rate increases over 10 years to fund the project. Because water revenue is general fund money, it just comes into the general fund. So in an effort to be transparent and do a proper accounting of, where we are on the MWRA project, and just to be able to document and account for that, we go in and calculate the amount of those water revenues that were associated with the MWRA water increases. We put them into this fund. And then in May, we calculate how much we need for this year, and we appropriate it out in May to offset that portion of the budget. At some point in time, what we hope is that all the water revenue becomes water revenue, and we don't have to do this, but the purpose of it at the time, we felt it was very important to be transparent with the town. It was a very big project, and we didn't want the costs associated with joining up with the MWRA to sort of just get buried in the ordinary water revenue without being able to account for it to the public. So we chose this. It's a little bit clunky. We've actually spoken to the subcommittee about reviewing the possibility of setting up water and sewer as in an enterprise form of accounting in the future, which is an accounting mechanism to basically account for water and sewer as if it was a private utility. So you account for all your costs there, determine what the true cost to make water or to dispose of sewer is, and then you can determine how much, if any, you want to subsidize from the general fund, but at least you'll know what it costs us to produce a gallon of water. So that's something that we've broached the topic with TH1 as something that the town could possibly look at in the future. But I agree, it's a little bit of a clunky mechanism right now, and we did it solely for the purpose of just trying to do a proper accounting of those funds, given the town's support for the MWRA project.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion on that? Roger?
So since this is a fund, what is its current balance before this transfer?
It's about 175,000 in there at the end of last year.
Great, thanks.
So the general idea is that money goes in and it essentially all gets spent that
So
year.
we'll be back here talking about a similar article in May, but going the other way. Hopefully only for another year or two.
Yeah, I'm sorry, how much longer do we anticipate paying for MWRA in this fashion?
Well, absent enterprise fund, which Paul was just talking about, after we're done borrowing all the money and officially up and running with MWRA fully, then we pull the Band-Aid off and everything goes in as water revenue, and everything goes in as expense, and there's no more transfer from somewhere else to supplement it. So
And
it takes
how-
time when the rate increases all kick in and you borrowed all the money. Now you don't have to play the accounting game anymore.
We have one more phase of the project left, Phase 2B, which is to complete the line from about Adams Street to approximately Mall Road. The connection we have in place now from Arlington, the big pipe, the long project, currently provides us upwards of 3.5 million gallons per day. The water engineer folks feel as though if we complete a new main from Adams to Mall Road, hydraulically, that will allow us to pull upwards of 6 million gallons per day. And what that connection would allow us to do is to completely shut down the mill pond if we had to, provide the entire town with water during a difficult, hot summer day. So that's the redundancy we were looking for with it. And by completing that final link, it really gives us, the first link, saved us from the terror we were living with of the system going down due to a water break or something like that. This final Phase 2B, which was contemplated right from the beginning, will provide us with those additional gallons of water per day hydraulically to pull through the pipe.
Right, and I understand everything's basically going according to plan. When is, but what I don't remember is when is that plan supposed to complete?
I think we were going to go for an appropriation in May for that.
Okay, great. Mike?
Can I ask one more question on this? So when we complete the plan and we have the hookup that we want with MWRA, do we have like just a projected percentage we're going to take from MWRA versus making our own out of Mill Pond, or is that going to vary year to year?
We actually did, Mike. I guess what I would say is going to throw a wrinkle into that was the introduction of the PFAS. So we had some pretty good projections as to how we would utilize MWRA water versus Mill Pond water leading up to that. However, with the institution of the new treatment of the PFAS component, we got some additional costs associated with the Mill Pond. So we have some filters there. Again, I'm getting out of my element here, but the filter media that actually filters the water, we don't have a history on how often we're going to have to replace that. The DEP required us to use a medium that was a little bit more expensive than what the town had hoped for, which someone was mentioned, activated carbon, I think was what we had hoped to use, and they required us to use something else. It was a little bit more costly. And again, we don't really have a history of how long that media will be able to clean water with before it needs to be replaced. So that's a little bit of an unknown cost to us right now. But up until the PFAS issue, I think Public Works could have given us a really good idea in terms of we'd have the ability to choose whichever water was less expensive, or we could use it seasonally. We could develop a more fuller plan, but what's preventing us from doing that right now is just not fully understanding the treatment costs for the PFAS as we move forward up at Mill Pond.
Okay, and as I seem to recall, when the PFAS treatment came online, it was, reducing PFAS by maybe a 10 times greater level than it needed to. But then again, I think the state may, or federal, I don't know which one controls it, may continue to say that the accepted level of PFAS is going down. So it's
yeah, the state started by lowering it, and now the federal is talking about lowering it even further. Fortunately, the filtering system we have up there is working outstanding. We're getting great feedback. It's improved water quality in other areas as well with this filter media material. Yep. The problem is it's unclear to us how often we're going to have to replace that filter material in order to get the same results at this point. We just don't have a long enough history of using it.
Steve?
What is the disposal process of the PFAS particulates that are captured, and is there a cost to that as well?
I unfortunately can't answer that, but yes, we do pay for disposal of, anything that's hazardous, obviously very expensive as well, but we could get an answer from Public Works on that, Steve.
Motion to approve. Second?
Thank you. There's no ed there. Okay. So this is Article 9, transfer from free cash to water stabilization fund, $1,424,514. Those in favor, raise your hands. Opposed? Okay. That's 1300. Article 10, opioid settlement fund.
Yes, Article 10 opioid settlement. Town of Burlington was part of a lawsuit initiated by the Commonwealth of Mass against various pharmaceutical companies and distributors regarding the opioid crisis. A settlement was reached, And based on the settlement, the town will receive a total of $638,080 between fiscal year '23 and '39. Pursuant to the settlement agreement, the town has set up a special revenue fund with the proceeds used specifically to supplement and strengthen programs that are associated with the academic. A committee has been formed, including members which obviously deal with this crisis firsthand. We did receive our first installment for fiscal '23, which was $134,189. And this article will transfer the funds into that newly formed account. The oversight of the committee and the expenditures out of that fund, which are yet to be determined, will be the oversight of the select board. Subcommittee voted 2-0 in favor.
Okay, discussion on Article 10? Yeah, John?
Chairman, just add one thing, that the reason that we're here to ask for this is because when we received this money last year, the legislature hadn't got around to allowing cities and towns to put this money directly into a special revenue account. We know what we had to spend it on, which is the only thing we're allowed to spend it on, treatment, prevention, education, that sort of thing. But there wasn't a legal mechanism for us to put the money directly there. So in our case, it closed to free cash. It was a local receipt, a general fund receipt, closed to free cash. Now we're here doing this. In the future, we won't have to come back to have this money moved from free cash, because it will be deposited directly into special revenue fund and only to be spent on those allowable costs.
So we won't need to do this after this year?
No, one time.
The warrant article would go away, but it's a revolving account, correct?
Yeah, similar to overall.
Second.
Made? Okay.
But a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
So on the committee, besides the use of funds, I imagine a few departments that are on it. What's the roster of the committee?
Police, fire, youth and family services, COA, Board of Health, and
Okay, thanks.
Any further discussion before we vote? All right, those in favor, raise your hand, please. Opposed? Very good. Okay, that's 13-0-0. Next is Article 11, Transportation Infrastructure Fund.
So this article is, again, rideshare program. The state assesses a 20-cent fee on rides that originated out of Burlington. The town it gets 10 cents to share for each of those rides. We generally then transfer those funds into the account, which are used to offset our town rideshare transportation program. So for fiscal year '22, the amount generated was believe it or not, $24,800. So the subcommittee voted 2-0 to transfer the funds.
Excellent.
Mr. Chairman, they didn't vote until Frank questioned how we could have 250,000 Uber rides in town.
It's an astounding number of rides.
I think we're all astounded that this, at 10 cents a ride, this corresponds to almost 250,000 rides, which is like 600 rides a day or something, so.
2019, this number was 31,000. So again, it's amazing. It has certainly rebuilt itself back up to, but it's not even where
There are
it was.
a lot of people going somewhere. I'm curious, do we have, what was the Beeline ridership? Do we happen to know what the number was on that offhand during its heyday?
Not 250,000.
It wasn't 250,000, no.
A little bit less than 250,000.
Yeah.
Right, so,
Somewhere around 17.
right, so it's, hard to know what the relative clientele is, but it's certainly interesting. Discussion on this? Okay. So this is Article 11, Transportation Infrastructure Fund, transferring $24,800 from receipts reserved into that fund. Those in favor, raise your hand, please. Opposed? Okay, that's 13-0-0. Next is the Recreation Cargo Van. Roger.
Thank you. So Sonia and I talked probably now a month ago with Brendan about a cargo van that they have which failed to be inspected. So they've got it's not a passenger van, a cargo van. It's got front seats and it's empty in the back, and they use it for transporting equipment to any of the rec department events in between things. It is from 2005, so it's 9 years old. It's rusted out. There are pictures in the backup. The rec department looked at a number of alternatives. Could they lease a van? Could they borrow one from somewhere else? They looked at a number of alternatives. But they ultimately decided with the level of use that they have, they really need to replace it. The lead times for the vans are probably 6 months or more, so they felt it was not really a good idea to put it off until May. So it's appearing on the January warrant. They're looking for $50,000 to buy a cargo van and fit it out in a very minimal way. There's some chance that the price will go up, but there is some contingency built into the $50,000 that they're requesting. So the subcommittee, Sonia and I voted 2-0 to support it.
Okay. A discussion on this? Chris?
So one of the things I asked last year when we had done a couple of these was if there's somebody that can look through these and make sure we're streamlining the process, because from 2005, that we got a lot of money out of that vehicle. When we did I believe it was the DPW, and then there was a school van as well. But looking at the specifics on what we're then paying for to make sure that we're optimizing the light buttons. So one of them had like mud flaps and some other coating to help protect the engine and ensure that we're keeping up the full life of it. Those are the things that for $500, $1,000 could increase the life of this 2-3 years. So I was just wondering if all it says is estimated model increases. If somebody is looking at these when we're continuing to go for different vehicles that do need to be replaced, DPW needs to replace, rec will need to replace, but if we're consistently looking at the things that are needed for the maintenance side of it, and then making it easier for our maintenance people that need to keep up with us.
So just going back to that, so Brendan is actually relying on the folks in DPW Central Maintenance for their recommendation on the current conditions and vehicles to replace it with and current market conditions. All this stuff is bought off the state bid list, so prices are kind of as good as we're going to get. But I agree that keeping an eye on maintenance is something that we're relying on Central Maintenance to do.
And I think I specifically asked DPW about that because it just seemed like some vehicles have some things that they're going for and some didn't, and if there is a reason for that or not. Because again, these vehicles are going to continuously need to be replaced. We're going to continue to incur $50,000, $100,000 when we replace these. We were going from, I think it was a smaller pickup to a larger pickup in the rec department last time. And again, it made sense in the reasoning, but just that we're specifically looking through this and making sure that what needs to be in there for this schematics are in there.
Did you have something, Doug?
Yeah, are these the vehicles, so I'm trying to think of any other separate boards that have vehicles under their responsibility. Was this in the general replacement plan for all that we have across?
Yeah, it just kept getting kicked out and kicked out. I mean, we didn't get cheated on this vehicle. That's
No, I don't mean cheating, no.
I think it was on Brendan's capital list 2 years ago, a couple years ago.
Yeah, I remember
They
that,
pushed it
yeah.
out.
This is an old one.
Yeah.
But it falls in that big spreadsheet that DPW we're going to
Yes.
Yeah, and they review every vehicle and then decide, can it stay in its slot or does it need to go forward or backwards?
Steve?
Just one additional point. I think this year, with the new maintenance facilities that we have online and the ability to wash the underneath of the carriage, we should see extended life if we do the proper maintenance and take care of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like this vehicle, I mean, it was 19 years old, and it has about 2,000 miles a year on it, so.
Wasn't driven enough.
Yeah, yeah, and this is used primarily for cargo as opposed to passengers, is that correct?
There's no seats except the front driver and passenger, one passenger.
Okay. Further discussion?
Second?
Very good. All right, this is Article 12 for recreation cargo van, $50,000 from free cash. Raise your hand if in favor, please. Opposed? All right, that's 13-0-0. I did, just in case, we had Article 13 on the firefighter maximum age waiver, just in case that had a financial implication. And I believe you determined, Mike, that it does not.
Right.
It's no more than we would anticipate with hiring anyone else. They're just slightly above the maximum limit of 32 years old, so there needs to be a special warrant just for that.
Yeah, and kind of going back to last year, we talked about the fire department and how difficult it's been to replace people there. So I think that's, part of the reason behind this. So it's, when I first saw the article, I thought it was someone who wanted to stay longer than usual, but this is actually trying to bring a new person in to the position. But yeah, there's nothing out of the ordinary with any finances behind it.
Okay, so as a result, I don't think we need to take a vote on that. I don't believe there's any other financial articles to discuss here. We had a topic for the debt scheduling, large projects, financial dashboard. Did you want to give us a quick update where we stand on that process?
Is everyone aware of what's been going on there? You got the backdrop?
Go ahead, give us a synopsis.
My synopses tend to take too long.
In your usual terse method.
You can let David do it.
What's the deal, David?
I think you should handle this.
All right. What we always get from...
I'll nudge you if you're...
From the administration, they always give us some kind of a debt schedule, what's going to come up in what year, what the cost will be, principal and interest, and what's the rollout of the ones in the future. And we also have information about, in one way, and that ties directly back into the capital plan. So we got kind of aggressive about, could we have a more comprehensive look at all of the things that affect the debt, and get a better lineup with capital planning. And so they've been working really hard on that to get us, I think you've reformulated the look of the capital plan, and you're going to bring that out. So it's just more readable, usable, up to date. We'll tie that into the debt schedule, and then we can tie that into, on a fiscal year basis, what expenses might look like going forward, so we can get a handle on things like excess levy capacity, growth of the tax rate based on anticipated borrowing, that sort of thing. So we're working up, there's a template, and off of that you can pick off these numbers and these views, and you get a better handle on what the implications are of what we are doing, what we will be doing very soon, and what we might be doing in the not too distant future. And it's mostly capital and infrastructure that drives these bond issues. There are a few other things, like I don't know if the fire engine's on there or not. I don't remember, but so that's what this is all about. And they're trying to clean that all up, get it structurally so that and we'll plug in a good set of numbers. We'll get a review of that, and then we can use it going forward as a cleaner mechanism to update ourselves on what these things are looking like, what debt's looking like, what the levy's looking like, what the excess capacity is looking like, what infrastructure things are out there that might be problematic, can we move them around, that sort of thing. That's my view of why it's important and what they're doing. And it's just a better document to do all of that and get it as much as possible in one place, as you can pick it up and look at it, and it looks familiar, from year to year, even on 6-month bases, so that we are more, we can keep ourselves better informed about the implications of these things that we're doing in the way of borrowing especially, and in the way of infrastructure planning, and where the tax rate's going to go as a result of that. So I think that's what drove it. And John, you had a lot to do with wanting this as well.
Yeah, so the thing I'll just throw in here is that I think in the past, we've sort of looked at our debt line item is, nicely just sort of fitting into the budget, and we didn't have to think about it too much. And the difference we're seeing now with the police station, Fox Hill, some kind of high school project, that these size projects are like 3x the size of the kind of things we were looking at the past with the PFAS filter, the memorial school, the middle school upgrade. So the scale of what we're doing has gotten dramatically larger, and then as a result, the associated debt service is dramatically larger. And as a result, things don't just sort of magically fit into the budget anymore without thinking too hard. I know Paul and John thought real hard about it, so we didn't have to. But it doesn't fit in as easily anymore, to the point where to do these type of projects, we really need to be thinking about debt exclusions in order to make sure that we don't bump into our levy limit. And in particular, with even with debt exclusions, we have an issue that sort of 5-ish years from now, depending on how you look at it, we have our levy going up at a certain rate, which we saw as the target sort of 4.5 to 5.5, and then we have our levy limit going up, but not at as high a rate. So the inevitable, as Dr. Bond will tell us from the mathematical point of view, we'll quickly see that if the levy is going up faster than the levy limit, eventually we're going to hit the levy limit. And if you do that extrapolation, you do end up at somewhere around 5 or so years that you're hitting that limit, and the only way you can increase the levy as much as we might feel we need to is to have a Proposition 2.5 override then. Otherwise, we would be limited to 2.5% increases plus new growth, which might be an extra percent or whatever, but it's not going to get us to these 4.5% kind of numbers that we have been doing. So we'll have a reckoning coming up here where we need to think about, do we want to continue increasing our levy and budget at the rate we have been because we like these level of services? Do we want to not do that, live within 2.5, which would involve reducing our spending, obviously? So the point of the debt exclusion is to put off that day of reckoning a little further, so that these large projects happen outside of the Proposition 2.5 limit. Debt exclusion allows that to be on top of whatever 2.5 would allow otherwise. So this is the kind of thing we need to be thinking about, how we want to manage that process. But the current plan is that there would be a debt exclusion for both the police station and for the Fox Hill School. So that's something we need to be thinking about, A, if we're behind it, and B, if we are, how we're going to get the town behind that in town meeting, because they all need to buy into this. It's a town-wide vote, and obviously, since it's a bonding issue, town meeting needs to approve with a 2/3 vote. So that's where we are. And Frank, when are we anticipating that we'll have our next
Well, I
update
thought
on
you,
that?
You were thinking maybe in like 4 to 6 weeks, you would have it really cleaned out?
Yeah.
So sometime in the midst of the budget season, we'll have, a couple of new documents to work off of. And, the excess levy capacity and debt exclusions and all that are really an important issue to figure out. But regardless of that, anything that you buy, you've got to pay for. And we're trying to look at the pacing and the size and the distances between these big expenses to try to level things out. And we want to see just how much, how much of an increase we can absorb at a given time and fit the projects in. And you really need a way to play with that a little bit and look at it. And I think these documents will give us the ability to plug numbers in and see what they do. So it's just better tools. The administration's done this sort of thing forever, but, they do it in their own accounting system, their own spreadsheet system, and they do it in parts and pieces. I don't think there's really a tremendous awakening to the administration, to Paul and to John and other people in the town hall. But for us, we've never had a way to look at it quite that way, and we've been able to do this pretty simplistically, just because it fit. Our debt, the accommodated account for debt has sort of been between, 5 and 6%, around in there, increases each year. Am I right? Around in there, fairly low.
What's to 8 on a big year?
On a big year. And that's all in the accommodated account. So the accommodated account absorbs the dollars that go right to the budget to pay for increased debt. Well, you'd like to get a better sense of how much of that, that's one piece of the accommodated account we can more directly manage by when we kick off the projects. How much, can we break them into pieces? Do we use bond anticipation notes to slow them down? And you can get a picture of that numerically and with chronology off of the right documents. And I think it's pretty hard for me to do anyway in my head, and I'm hoping these tools will give us all a better way to understand it, to see it, play with it.
All right, any further discussion on that? Mike?
So it was kind of shocking to hear some of the prices on for example, the new police station, the proposed stuff. And I think, Paul, you said it's been driven by just the expense of construction, and the expense of materials has gone up 2 to 3 times what it was just a few years ago. Is that behind some of this?
I'd say that's, the increase in construction costs that happened, over the course of the pandemic is really be difficult to predict those kind of increases. I think we talked, John and I always talk about that school right over the border on Wyman Street in Woburn. I think they did that school for $32 million 5 years ago. Maybe the same size or larger than Fox Hill that we're contemplating. So, pretty significant increases, just build things. And it seemed to occur, as we got into the pandemic, there was when things really sort of went off the rails, and it hasn't really come down yet at this point, so.
Yeah. I remember just the cost of wood was just crazy. It was like triple or quadruple what it was, earlier. So it's kind of sad that it hasn't come back down, I guess. Can I ask one question for these guys? So, do you have a sense for this year, coming up with the budgets and everything, on how many new positions we're looking at for the town? And I guess you wouldn't know the school side, but at least for the town side.
We're not anticipating any on our side this year.
The only conversation we'll be having on the town side is for some positions that are funded partially through opera for substance abuse, that the conversation will be, do we absorb them in the budget in order to keep that service?
Okay, great, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Let me just highlight Mike's our representative on the police building committee, so there's your inside track if you have questions.
Yeah, maybe when we get into the season and once we get a little further on, I'll start providing some updates to the committee.
Yeah, let me know when you want to be on the agenda with that.
Okay.
Frank?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the labor side, so with the fire department, one of the problems we've had is just finding people. So we've been using a lot of, I guess it's overtime, is what fills that gap. Any hope, I mean, I would be in favor of hiring in order to, get out of the overtime hole that we're in. Any hope for that?
We had discussed that with the chief as a possible solution going forward, but again, we can't hire for the open slots that we have now, so if we say we're to add 4 more available positions, we just have eventually when we get caught up, I think it would serve its purpose in lowering the overtime.
Even filling the open ones, any prognosis on that?
What did he say he got off the most recent list?
So I think we have 6 vacancies. I think we're getting 3 off the list with a potential.
So the vacancies directly contribute to this overtime?
It's the bulk of it.
Yeah. So I think in part answer, I think Mike, I think in part the answer is we really would like to hire into the fire department because I don't think it would cost more money in the end, but it's certainly a better way to run the operation. So I would encourage that as much as you possibly can, and I know it's not easy.
Yeah, we've begun the discussion. I think it's a
Yeah.
longer term,
Yeah,
in discussion with the
and it-
collective bargaining unit and the
Right.
chief, and it's a larger discussion.
I see.
Just adding four folks.
Yeah, okay. Well, the committee, I think, in general, I would support it as much as we can to let you do that.
Yeah, it's not even adding new positions, it's trying to
Filling
fill
the ones we
vacancies.
got.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Chris?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe for our firefighters, we also want to be trained paramedics.
Yes.
And so have we gone back looking at, if we want to keep that requirement? Again, it's great that that's the level, but is that, I think the question we had last time was this, is that keeping us from getting any recruits where they can then potentially join as just a firefighter and earn those certifications while they're here and grow with the Burlington Fire Department?
We've been having those discussions as well, in terms of negotiating whether we can hire EMTs and then train them to paramedic level. I mean, the paramedic training, my understanding, is close to a 1-year program, so it's a pretty significant commitment where, we would not be filling the shifts, so the person wouldn't necessarily help the overtime, but it would get us there eventually. But we're looking at all options right now, and that's one of them.
Yeah, it's just because it's, it's the problem last year, problem this year. It's going to probably be a problem next year. We only have so many slots at our academies, then so many that want to then come. And part of me wonders, is that where we want to put some of our investment of paying for the courses to get them early? Okay, we may not get them for a year, but now we're actually going to solve our problem next year for one that we still can't solve this year.
Yep, I'd say that option is on the table and being considered.
All right, I guess we're all set with that. We're moving into the fun part of the meeting if you guys want to take off. Thanks so much. Thank you. Okay, so just coming back to the Burlington Civic Expo, now that you've had an hour to think about it, if anyone has ideas as to what might make sense to do there, love to hear them. Spout it now or get to me quickly. We need to get things into Amy in the next day or two so that they can print up some stuff for us. Otherwise, Doug and I will brainstorm come up with our own fabulous ideas.
How about a hat for contributions to the general fund?
That's an excellent idea. It could sure be like the tax form where we could have a checkbox where you can pay extra if you want.
Big sale for the Fox Hill School.
Maybe we can recruit for the fire department.
Oh, so maybe, we've, the one financial sheet that I've appreciated in the past is our comparison to other towns, so people get an understanding on, where Burlington fits in. Maybe if we have something like that, so people come in can kind of understand, relatively speaking, that they're, where how their taxes compare to other communities.
That's a good point. I don't know if people are aware of how we stack up that way.
You might get a stack of the budget reports, of the budget books, and/or the annual report.
You can have my budget book.
All right. And
So John's cycle of it, budget cycle diagram, I don't know if that's of any interest to people, but just, here's how deliberative we are about the budget, in terms of reviews and how things happen. If you look at the graphics,
okay. One of the other things we were thinking about is getting people's input on what large projects that they would find interesting here. Be interesting to see if everyone, put their money on a police department, or they really want to see a new high school, or whatever.
performance space for Burlington players and other people who need to perform.
We could put a bucket for that. Okay, well, think about that and get your ideas in, please. Our final topic is the approval of minutes. So this is from our September 20th meeting, so you've had plenty of time to review them. Do we have any comments on the minutes before we vote?
Yeah.
Move to approve?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, those in favor of approving the September 20th minutes, raise your hand, please. Is that everyone but Chris Delaney? Okay. All right, so I think, and...
Thanks to our
opposed?
voters. Thank you.
Abstain? Okay. All right, so we have Chris Delaney is abstain. The rest are yes, which is 1201. All right, do we have anything else to discuss tonight?
So the next time we meet, do you have that schedule out? No.
I have schedule, and John just
there.
gave me the okay to forward that, so I'll get that out probably tomorrow.
Okay.
So I'll take a look at it, but I think it's sort of 3-ish weeks from now. I'll get that out.
Right.
It should be like mid-February, right?
Yeah, it's something on that order. So it'll be a little bit of time for the first, which I think is going to be Town Hall 1, just to warn you, to get the first ones in. And then you should plan on, at that point, we'll have a meeting every week until May town meeting, pretty much. So wipe all your Wednesdays clean for this, and life will be good. All right, anything further? All right, I think that's it. Thank you. We're adjourned.